Picture Spain in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The country was experiencing an economic boom that seemed unstoppable. This prosperity was driven almost entirely by a single industry: real estate. New construction sites filled the landscapes of cities and towns, and the promise of a bright economic future was on everyone's lips. Everywhere, people were excited about the growing cities, new homes, and expanding communities. The dream of owning a property was no longer just for the wealthy. It was something almost anyone could aspire to, and the entire nation was caught up in this collective dream. It started with favorable interest rates and low barriers to borrowing. At the time, Spain was part of the newly established European Union, which meant a shift to the euro currency, bringing stability and lower interest rates. This helped people feel more financially secure, and banks began offering attractive loan packages. With little hesitation, people began buying property, feeling confident in the country's economic future. This led to a massive demand for homes, apartments, and properties, which only fueled further development. People bought not only homes to live in, but also properties as investments. Property values were soaring, and many people believed that real estate was the safest investment possible. Real estate developers, sensing the opportunity, jumped on the bandwagon. Large companies, small contractors, and even international firms began building new projects all across the country. Spain became one of the most construction-intensive countries in Europe. Every region, from the coastal resorts to urban centers, became a hub of new buildings. Some of these properties were luxurious beachfront apartments intended for wealthy Europeans looking for vacation homes. Others were suburban developments marketed to young Spanish families hoping to achieve the dream of homeownership. It seemed like there was something for everyone, and no one wanted to miss out. Behind the scenes, banks were playing a huge role in this frenzy. They provided loans with minimal requirements, often without thoroughly checking if borrowers could actually repay. If people wanted a loan, the banks were willing to give it, sometimes even covering the full value of the property. In fact, some banks were so enthusiastic that they began offering interest-only loans, where the borrower paid just the interest for the first few years. This allowed people to buy properties they couldn't otherwise afford, pushing more people into the market and creating a buying frenzy. Banks saw this as a safe investment, believing that even if a borrower defaulted, the property would still be worth more than the loan. The government, meanwhile, encouraged this growth. Spain's economy was heavily reliant on real estate and construction, and this boom seemed like a blessing. Government policies were designed to support developers and make it easier for them to build. Local governments, in particular, were motivated to issue construction permits and sell public land to developers, as it brought immediate revenue and created jobs. This created a positive feedback loop, where local leaders, developers, and bankers all worked together to keep the housing market growing. Few questioned whether this growth was sustainable. However, the early signs of a bubble were already beginning to show. Property prices were rising at a faster rate than incomes, and fewer people could afford homes based on their salaries alone. But banks continued to lend, assuming that property values would keep increasing, making any risks seem small. By 2006, Spain was building more homes than Germany, France, and the UK combined, despite having a much smaller population. Entire towns and suburbs were built in anticipation of continued demand. These ghost towns would later become symbols of the housing crisis. The bubble kept growing, fueled by optimism and speculation. People started buying homes with the sole intent of selling them later for a profit. It wasn't just Spaniards either. Investors from all over Europe were purchasing Spanish properties, seeing them as a surefire way to make money. The idea that property prices always go up became a popular belief. But this wasn't based on any fundamental truth. It was a result of the artificial demand created by easy loans and speculative buying. In reality, the market was vulnerable, and the signs of a pending collapse were clear to those who were paying attention. Then, in 2008, the global financial crisis hit. It was a wake-up call for countries around the world. And for Spain, it was a disaster. Banks that had been recklessly lending suddenly faced a shortage of funds. The flow of easy money stopped, and the entire Spanish economy felt the impact. Demand for property plummeted, prices dropped, and the bubble burst. The once thriving real estate market came crashing down, leaving behind a trail of financial devastation. For homeowners, the crash was catastrophic. Many were left with negative equity, meaning they owed more on their mortgages than their homes were worth. They were trapped. Selling their homes would result in massive losses, but continuing to pay for them was also financially unsustainable. Families who had invested their savings, hoping to build a future, found themselves in debt. Foreclosures became common, and countless people lost their homes. In a matter of months, the dream of property ownership had turned into a national nightmare. The construction industry, which had been one of Spain's largest employers, collapsed. Thousands of construction projects were abandoned, leaving buildings half-finished. Unemployment soared, particularly in regions where construction had been the main source of income. Spain's unemployment rate reached over 25%, one of the highest in Europe, with youth unemployment reaching nearly 50%. An entire generation faced a grim reality. They had few job prospects, little income, and no way to afford the homes that had once been promised to them. The banks, which had fueled the bubble, were left with massive losses. Many went bankrupt, while others needed government bailouts to survive. This added to the financial burden on the Spanish government, which was already struggling to manage the crisis. To pay for the bailouts, the government had to make difficult decisions, including cutting public spending. This led to austerity measures that affected healthcare, education, and social services, adding to the suffering of the Spanish people. The social impact of the crash was profound. Protests erupted across the country as people voiced their anger and frustration. Families who had lost their homes, workers who had lost their jobs, and young people with no future prospects took to the streets. The crash exposed the deep flaws in Spain's economic model, and people demanded change. They wanted accountability from banks, developers, and government officials who had allowed the bubble to grow unchecked. In response, Spain's government implemented reforms to prevent a similar crisis from happening again. New banking regulations were introduced, and the housing market was more closely monitored. These changes helped to stabilize the economy, but the road to recovery was long and difficult. It took years for Spain to rebuild, and even today, the scars of the real estate bubble are visible across the country. Today, Spain's economy is more balanced and diversified, but the memories of the bubble remain. In many parts of Spain, there are still empty buildings, unfinished projects, and ghost towns that serve as reminders of the past. For the people who lived through it, the real estate bubble is a lesson in the dangers of unchecked growth and the importance of a stable economy. Spain's real estate bubble is a cautionary tale for other countries. It shows how easy credit, speculative buying, and a reliance on a single industry can create an illusion of prosperity. It also shows how quickly that illusion can shatter, leaving ordinary people to pick up the pieces. The story of Spain's real estate bubble is a powerful reminder of the need for economic balance and the risks of chasing short-term gains at the expense of long-term stability.